I think if you're all ready, we can begin with this last discussion of our conference. I am Odin Linardatou. I'm a journalist and head of communications at ELIAMEP. And this will be a very different discussion than the ones that we had these 2 days. We heard very interesting, excellent analysis from academics, scholars, professors, researchers, but it was all a little bit, theoretically. And I want to apologize to the professors that are here in the room. Well, now we are going to speak to the people that are in the diplomatic battlefields. We're going to talk with the people that are not afraid of the word compromise, because you heard before that compromise is a difficult word for Greeks and Turks, but it's not a difficult word for diplomats. We're going to talk to the ambassadors that want to talk when politicians do not want to talk, and try very hard to convince politicians that Greece and Turkey should continue to talk, even if there are many, many difficulties. And also these are the people that try to avert big crises and solve problems. And sometimes that is very, very difficult, of course, because as you said, and the previous panel said, when you have to deal with public opinions and politicians, everything gets complicated. So I want to welcome Ambassador Pavlos Apostolidis. Welcome, Ambassador. Ambassador Fatih Ceylan. Welcome, Ambassador. Ambassador Elias Clis. Welcome, Ambassador. And Ambassador Faruk Logoglu. Welcome. And I want to begin with Ambassador Apostolidis. You have dealt, and even in the last months, the last years, which have been very, very difficult for Greek-Turkish relations for many reasons, you have dealt, and through the Treaty of Lausanne, with the relations with Turkey. So how do you perceive the treaty when you try to negotiate and when you try to talk our politicians into continuing the talks with the other side?
Thank you very much. I want to start with a provocative statement. That is that had we not the present differences between Greece and Turkey, we may not have evoked the Treaty of Lausanne as often as we do. We perhaps not even have had the two-day meeting and discussion that we've had up to now. In diplomatic relations, treaties, and particularly 100-year-old treaties, are rarely evoked. In fact, during those 100 years, I'm not sure that they, until the last few years, that they had there was a case for calling upon the terms of the treaties. I tried to look at a little bit at the first years that it was mentioned already that in 1928 Venizelos came to power and immediately tried to straighten all the differences on property and minorities that could not be solved over the years. And he did. But what I wanted to say is that I found a discussion in the Greek parliament in 1930, 25th of June, where the leader of the opposition, Tsaldaris, accused Venizelos of giving away too much. And Venizelos' answer was that I do not rely on the agreement on minorities to defend the Greek minority of Constantinople, Istanbul if you want, but on the development of friendly Greek-Turkish relations. I think that was it is something that struck me because it is quite true even today that Lausanne has been evoked by either Greece or Turkey in an offensive or defensive way to support arguments over the usual things, the usual issues. But during the short periods that Greece and Turkey did not hate each other, things happened without the evocation of Lausanne or anything else. And I will mention 2 or 3 examples. We extended our airspace to 10 nautical miles in 1931, having territorial waters of 3 miles, and there was no real reaction. And okay, we say, and probably it was true, that this was to counter Italian, to limit Italian airplanes from flying on the Aegean, but still, it was something that was not part of Lausanne, but it was part of a relationship between the countries. There was a friendly relationship. The other thing was the fact that when Turkey decided to request the abolition of the demilitarization of the Straits, we supported Turkey. And the atmosphere was so good that we didn't even think of making sure that the islands of Samothrace and Limnos would be included in the treaty, with the result that much later there's still a discussion about this. Something else happened in 1931, and it might be a bit stretching this theory too far, is that in 1931 there was a big uprising or demonstrations, if you want, in Cyprus over the demand to unify with Greece. And Venizelos opposed it very strictly and sternly and put an end to the demand. Was he influenced by the good climate of Greek-Turkish relations, or was it that he felt that England could not be dealt with as what he said? I think that at that time it could not raise this matter with Great Britain. Maybe both. Take another example. Again, Cyprus. I didn't hear anyone mentioning Cyprus, but it's certainly a very important factor in Greek-Turkish relations. Although maybe we don't normally discuss it in our bilateral talks. Greek-Turkish relations after the war were very good. It was the communist threat that it was mentioned, I think, the speakers before me. It was also the fact that we were not opponents in the war that preceded, as in the First World War. And we had the King and Queen of Greece paid an official visit, a state visit to Turkey in '52. President Celal Bayar came to Athens and had a very good meeting. But in a very short time, less than a year, I think, or maybe a year, the question of Cyprus came up with Archbishop Makarios putting a lot of pressure on the new Prime Minister, the former General Papagos, to take the issue to the UN. And I saw that the Turkish press already picked that up in the autumn of '52, and '53 things became worse. And this is a very long story with Cyprus. with the major date is, of course, 74, which, with what happened in Cyprus, the fear of armed conflict developed at the Aegean between Greece and Turkey. Measures were taken, and these measures have most of them, anyhow, most of them are still there. Most of them are still there, although the danger, I think, that existed in 74, it doesn't exist anymore. But there are still statements. We all well know that there are still a lot of statements were quite provocative. So friendship, how do we achieve friendship? How do we achieve a situation which will allow us to negotiate? Or do we negotiate first before we achieve the level? I think that, again, I think that we both have to restrain both our media and our politicians in how they describe the other side. I think our problem is bigger than that of Turkey, because, well, Turkish ambassador will probably know, we can see it, that here in Greece we devote, the press, the media devote a lot of their time on Turkey. What happened, particularly over the last months. Now we have the elections, which are the first item. But the second item is Turkey, and not necessarily in a positive mood. Although things have, after the earthquakes, have changed, and I think that they give us an opening for a resumption of bilateral talks and for progress, because resumption for the sake of resumption is not enough. So we'll see. We have elections, governments. My experience tells me that governments that decide to tackle difficult issues like the problems, the bilateral issues we have with Turkey, need to do that in the first part of their term, because first 2 years, I would say, out of 4, because later a lot of other factors come in and prevent them from really making the gestures and taking the steps that they should be taken. Thank you.
And now to you, Ambassador Ceylan. You are also the president of the Ankara Policy Center, and you have a very big experience in the Turkish Foreign Ministry, of course, which was mentioned in the previous panel, because professors were talking that they don't know how it works with the politician and inside a foreign ministry when it comes to negotiations and talking with someone that you feel is your adversary. So the floor is yours.
Thank you, Ms. Chairperson, and I should like to extend my thanks to National and Kapodistrian University of Athens and ELIAMEP for organizing this seminal and important event on the eve of the centennial of the Treaty of Lausanne. So thank you for that. It's indeed a commendable effort to take stock of current relations and try to generate a constructive, forward-looking view on a variety of issues related but not confined to the Treaty of Lausanne. Now, let me start with your indulgence with one private aspect of my presentation, and then the other one from my NATO days. On the private side, you are seeing today a person sitting on this chair as the son of an emigre family who sailed from Kavala during the Etabli period to Turkey and they settled in a seaside small town by the Sea of Marmara. The reason why I want to share this, my private side, is that never throughout my childhood or in my younger years have I heard anything bad about Greece and the Greeks. Never, ever. It was a town full of emigres, mainly from Greece and from Crete. And I really and very candidly would like to share with you that they didn't utter any bad thing about neither Greece nor Greeks. That's important. From my NATO days, referring back to what compromise means in both Turkish and English, rather Greek, I think we were able to reach compromise within NATO. And there's a living witness to it. Alexander, my close colleague from my NATO days. So there was a possibility, a room for reaching compromise, at least in the context of NATO. What I remember from my early years, because I spent like almost more than 20 years in NATO affairs, in international security and defense, is that we used to have never-ending squabbles with our Greek colleagues, particularly in terms of defense planning and military planning. But nevertheless, we were able to find a common ground. Let me remind you, for instance, that before large-scale NATO exercises in the Aegean, we used to convene what we call NOTAM coordination meetings to avoid any mishap during the exercises. And we achieved it. I'm talking about the early 90s, okay? And we were able to launch, for instance, NATO-EU mission in the Aegean. I believe Alexander remembers that. And the third part of it is, I worked with Ambassador Michael Diamesis and Ambassador Spiros Lambridis. The first thing we did when we met at NATO is to strike a gentleman's agreement not to tremble upon the raw nerves of both countries. We are not talking about personalities. We are talking about countries. And we achieved it. So we were able to find a compromise, at least in the context of NATO, for a constructive and positive agenda. Now let me come back to my presentation. I think I noticed that nobody paid tribute to what Lukas Tsoulakis yesterday said, the president of the board of directors, ELIAMEP. He said, both sides should think out of the box to find a common ground. And that is extremely important, I think. It was a good message. And I had listened very carefully the presentations and the comments made since yesterday. Some I found very encouraging, and some a little bit discouraging. But nevertheless, I mean, this is the nature of it. So it's like a brainstorming, in a brainstorming mode. So for me, the Lausanne Peace Treaty signifies, for both countries, the end of a traumatic era and the beginning of a new epoch to govern their bilateral relations. Some parts may be outdated. There are still some chapters which are under discussion, as manifested in yesterday's and today's deliberations. But let me tell you something very, a strong recommendation from my side. From what I have been hearing since yesterday is that there is a controversy, certain degree of controversy on reinterpreting the provisions of the Lausanne Treaty against the backdrop of today's concepts and norms. I think this is misleading, a point which was raised by Professor Odin. So we should be very careful about it. So my recommendation is that we should own, both sides own the Treaty of Lausanne. Arguments to the contrary, to disown it or to rebut it is a dangerous path, and that should be noted by our Greek friends and colleagues because of the present environment in Turkey particularly. Don't forget the presentation of Professor Ayhan Aktar on our side. Some of us, maybe half of us, are not happy with what's going on, but we should be careful. Greece should also be careful and don't tamper with the entirety of the Lausanne Treaty. That's my candid recommendation to my Greek friends and colleagues. And I remember periods of tension and calm. Certainly what's vivid in my mind, and which is still very alive, is the spirit of friendship and solidarity between Atatürk and Venizelos back in the 1930s. And I think we should also keep this in mind when we look to the future in terms of bilateral relations. After that period, we had additional pillars of friendship and solidarity in a multilateral format. I'm talking about NATO, accession of Greece and NATO in 1952, which added to a common understanding between the two countries. But then, of course, the Cyprus issue came to the fore in mid-1950s, and then on and on and on. And the sequence of events that started in the 60s culminated in the Turkish military intervention in Cyprus, 1974, and then we have a different era from 1974 till 2023, which kind of exacerbated the source of tension between Turkey and Greece, including the Aegean dimension. So I think we will continue to witness, maybe in the short term, let's hope that it's in the short term, some ebbs and ties in those relations, ups and downs, which are natural. I mean, sometimes neighbors disagree. This is natural. But I think we do not have the luxury of remaining in our political comfort zones of inaction, leaving the course of events to run their course and pitting the two countries against each other. We do not have such an option and such a luxury. This will certainly not yield any beneficial results, neither for Turkey nor for Greece. There is one clear fact, that there is a high degree of mutual distrust between Turkey and Greece. First, we should start rebuilding the trust and confidence between the two countries like we did in the 1930s. I think that is the correct and healthy recipe to improve ties between Turkey and Greece. I mean, there are many references to periods of calm, agreements, common understandings. Yilmaz Papulya's 1988 mentioned yesterday, Solana initiative within NATO for building confidence and trust. Madrid, July 1997. And again, confidence building measures, 1998. Lord Robertson coming into the picture and introducing a set of confidence building measures. And recently, after what happened in 2019, which again raised the tension between Turkey and Greece, again NATO was there, a deconfliction mechanism was, I would say, reactivated, because it was there, the acquis is there. So Stoltenberg simply reactivated this mechanism, and things started to calm down. Another challenge, of course, that we have been dealing, both Turkey and Greece, since the 1960s is the Cyprus issue, a series of long negotiations without any tangible results. So I think Given the present challenging circumstance, and I will elaborate that, it's become more important than ever to explore a common ground designed to bringing Turkey and Greece closer as two important NATO allies and very close neighbors. We should endeavor to break the vicious cycle that cultivates further seeds of tension between our countries. So I do insist that we should rekindle the spirit of friendship and solidarity emanating from the early 1930s for the future. And let me compare the two global orders, like in the 1930s, elaborated at length in previous sessions, and what we face today. And Professor Güvenç, for instance, talked about the end of Westphalian order and what have you, correct? But you never know. I mean, there could be an adapted version of Westphalian order because of the ongoing and deepening systemic rivalry among the United States, Russia, and China, an aggressive and revisionist Russia in our north, and different scenes of confrontation in the Far East, between the United States and Russia, and the surfacing of different approaches between the United States and Europe vis-à-vis China, and even sometimes Russia. So everything is in flux. That is what we face, an evolving security architecture based for the time being on one ongoing aggression and one deepening strategic competition between the United States and Russia. So again, I mean, the two countries, Turkey and Greece, under such circumstances, do not have the luxury of confronting each other in military terms, also in political terms, because the global order we face necessitate more than ever to increase the channels of dialogue, periodic and focused dialogue and consultations on a bilateral setting, as well as in multilateral frameworks. We are performing very good at NATO, by the way. I mean, it's a place for compromise. That is the multilateral setting. But we have not been able to achieve it in our bilateral relationship. This is a missing link, and that should be, eradicated. For this reason, we have to open all channels of dialogue and communication. And I proposed to my dear Alexander, now he is heading the political policy planning section at the ministry. Did you have any bilateral policy planning sessions with your Turkish counterpart? He said no. So why don't you, initiate it? Maybe after the elections in Greece, you never know. So, getting inspired by Professor Evantis Hagi Vassiliou yesterday, and particularly by Paniotis Ionakidi, this package deal, incremental deal, and things like that. I have 14 very brief ingredients to propose to our Greek friends and colleagues. Very brief. The leaders of both sides should once again come to their senses in terms of deploying political will to ease the atmosphere and build mutual trust. They should prepare conducive grounds not to succumb to the wills and whims of jingoists on both sides, both in political and religious terms, taking the public opinion hostage against good neighborly relations. They should avoid using inflammatory rhetoric and monopoly of blaming the other side. The High-Level Cooperation Council meetings should be revived without delay after the elections in Greece. I was responsible when I was Deputy Undersecretary in Turkish-Greek affairs, and I do remember attending such meetings, and too many agreements and MOUs were signed. A record number of MOUs and agreements. That should continue. A new impetus should be given to reinitiate talks on Cyprus, a long overdue issue for both sides. Exploratory talks should be revived without delay with renewed vigor and in a result-oriented manner. You can name them exploratory or whatever you wish, or you can use different track in addition to exploratory talks. Attempts such as today's event should be encouraged and elevated to open all channels of dialogue, both on official and non-official tracks. The number of exchange of young students and university staff should be increased to provide for further room for population-to-population contacts. A common denominator should be sought in pursuing public diplomacy, emphasizing the positive aspects of peace and cooperation with a view to minimizing the biases prevailing the relations both at the leadership and societal levels. Joint projects in connectivity, including but not limited to green energy, should be incentivized for the private sector to provide fresh impetus to economic commercial ties. No premium should be placed on belligerent attitudes displayed by both sides, and a search to demilitarize their foreign and security policy against each other should be prioritized. Mutual visits should take place at all levels, designed to enhance dialogue and ease the concerns of the public. The acquis of confidence-building measures inherited from the late 80s should be leveraged to structure a new frame of solidarity and cooperation on sensitive issues of mutual concern. In this regard, it's worth considering to consolidate and restructure a new process by introducing additional milestones of confidence and trust building between both sides. A new modus vivendi should be adopted within the multilateral structures, like in NATO, such as NATO, and maybe the EU, a little bit controversial, built on a previously agreed bilateral framework of mutual understanding. Greek official circles should be clear-eyed on the importance of Turkey's future integration with the EU and may use their good offices to encourage Greek Cypriots to adopt a similar attitude. It's clear, at least to me, that Turkey, anchored in Europe, is still in the interest of Greece, as had been the case in the past, particularly given the atmospherics in Turkey. I'm certainly aware of the political, legal, societal, and diplomatic challenges, and complexities and contestations involved in charting a roadmap to build confidence and trust between Turkey and Greece, so striking a durable frame of peace, not a transitional, but a durable, not a transitional, not a transactional, okay? But a durable frame of peace, solidarity, and cooperation. But I do know that the present state of precarious affairs between both sides will not serve their long-term interests, either in their bilateral relations or in a regional context. To conclude, I strongly believe that despite challenges involved, it is high time to take steps by both sides to revert to the spirit of the 1930s, emanating from the political atmosphere created by the signing of the Lausanne Treaty, by solidifying their friendship both as allies and neighbors. Both countries achieved this after going through tremendous agonies in the past by mutually adopting a peaceful vision for the future. I think we can again attain it in the 21st century on an adapted basis. Thank you very much indeed.
Well, you said inaction is not an option, and I keep that because I think that is very, very important, that we should not remain without taking actions. And now, Ambassador Clis.
Thank you very much. Well, I need to add my own thanks to ELIAMEP and the Athens University for organizing this significant conference, especially the university, which is dedicated to a very able peacemaker, Ioannis Kapodistrias. It's good to see Lausanne, because Lausanne is a basis. Lausanne ended an era and started a new one. Lausanne was the balanced product of intense negotiation. It was not an agreement dictated unilaterally. It took a year to conclude it, and it was an evident success for Turkey, given that the victory in Asia Minor reversed to quite an extent the Serbs' approach. Nevertheless, Lausanne was also completed the restructure of the world architecture along the new realities, thus affecting and reshaping a huge geographical region. We must recognize that Lausanne provided a solid basis on which the future of the countries of the Mediterranean, Southeast and beyond have been formed and indeed being transformed during these 100 years. In this sense, Lausanne was more successful in providing a workable framework for positive international evolution than its other historical siblings, especially the Treaty of Versailles. It has helped a wider area to navigate securely through quite interesting times, if I can use the Chinese connotation, as these 100 years have proven to be. But its main contribution was to Greek-Turkish relations, to a radical change. It was, for Greece, well known, it was a tragic event, as it terminated millennia of Greek presence from the Aegean coast to the Black Sea. But the treaty actually provided a very good basis for the future. The treaty did not stand alone. It was the end product of a long process of wars and agreements that marked the demise of the Ottoman Empire. And this legacy of changes was taken into account when the configuration of the Greek and Turkish future was defined in Lausanne. It proved, therefore, to be an exercise in realism that ensured its stability and its duration, as well as its acceptance by both sides. I can say that. The basic thing is that the treaty provided a clear and undisputed configuration of the territorial allocation under its sovereignty. This allowed each country to address the difficult process of adjustment to the new future and the new world environment. It allowed progress on both sides of the Aegean to advance peacefully. It allowed the possibility of a new understanding. Their sovereignty secure, within permanent frontiers, both countries were able to concentrate on rebuilding their identity and addressing the challenges of the new world realities. Greece, devastated economically, a country practically bankrupt in 1922-23, facing world depression, was able to integrate refugees, was able to rebuild a productive economy and to make openings and strategic choices that proved significant to its future. It was able to stand as it should during the First World War, and was able to make strategic choices along the liberal future that Lausanne orientation dictated, as Evanthis said yesterday. For Turkey, Again, the same parameters allowed redefinition, modernization, allowed the building of a new Turkish identity compatible with the world progress. Both countries, after Lausanne, were able to deploy efforts of friendship initiatives and efforts for regional cooperation and common security alignments. For Turkey, as well as for Greece, the Lausanne truly allowed a new beginning. And I think that if I judge on a statement issued by President Erdogan on the Lausanne Treaty anniversary in 2018, the evaluation is no different. There are as I said, the treaty provided a clear and undisputed configuration of the territorial allocation under its sovereignty. That is the factor that allowed the difficult process of adjustment to the new future in both countries. That was the good part. I think that Lausanne Treaty also is very commendable on what they tried to do with minorities. There was an agreement of population exchange concluded before the peace treaty. It was termed correctly as an act of cruel realism earlier in this conference. But it was the formal recognition of facts already on the ground. Exchange was already done, in fact, since over 1 million of destitute refugees had already took refuge to the Greek mainland and the islands, and those fewer left behind needed to be protected. Certainly, we can criticize this action from the humanitarian aspect of today, but as a blemish of international law, but it was an act of realism. And in a sense, strange as it seems, this seismic event definitely made the closure with the past and its failed aspirations permanent for the Greek society. The treaty made a commendable effort to guarantee the preservation of remaining minorities within the new sovereign Turkish Republic on the basis of religion, given the appalling history of events in the past decade. The effort was modeled on the past Millet system, but more than the treaty guarantees, needed a state particularly careful in protecting citizens' rights and equality. A comparison to the actual state of minority communities recognized by the treaty in Greece and in Turkey shows that the protection has failed as far as Istanbul is concerned. Instead of creating a bridge of understanding, this Pact of Lausanne remains a sort of sadness and mistrust in Greece, but not because of the treaty itself. In coming to the final evaluation, I would say that the Lausanne Treaty was a very successful diplomatic exercise, giving the past that 100 years after the event, it does retain the possibility, as shown in the past, in the 30s, in the 40s, in the support that Turkish society provided to the Greek society during the German occupation, and in the common progress towards NATO, it shows the possibility of things to come. I will agree with Fatih that trust needs to be rebuilt. We need. I'm a romantic, possibly, but I think that the Greek public opinion would understand the value of compromise if they knew where they stand, and if they were clear about the rules of that compromise. I also agree with Fatih that trust suffered a lot on many levels, and trust needs to be rebuilt consciously. That can be done only by projecting the Lausanne paradigm. Lausanne does provide a concept of how to address newer questions that need to be defined, such as the maritime limits and so on and so forth. But certainly shows that this can be done in a process of closer cooperation and better understanding. And Lausanne must be projected as that process. Any move to undermine Lausanne would, and I agree with you in that, would be destabilizing poison for the region. Therefore, if possible, let's move along the spirits, the post-Lausanne spirit that emerged. And I've seen with quite an interest the list that Fatih enumerated. They're very interesting things to discuss. Thank you.
Well, Ambassador Logoglu, the floor is yours now. And you were also a member of the Turkish Grand National Assembly, so your experience is dual, I could say?
Yes.
Yes, with the Treaty of Lausanne.
Well, thank you very much. First, I want to apologize for the poor quality of my voice. I have some problem with my vocal cords. But I want to thank the University of Athens and the Hellenic Foundation of European and Foreign Policy for organizing this conference. They are both great institutions, held at great esteem. I also want to extend a special thanks to my friend Minister Apostolidis. Our relationship goes back a long way, not 100 years, but quite a long way. And I also want to convey my get well wishes to Professor Rozakis, who participated in the last panel. I was told he experienced an accident of some sort. I've known him in the past. We worked together. Now, I want to share with you a little story about cultural differences, which can be very challenging and important. The president of a multinational American company is going to Japan for the first time. And it's a very important occasion for his company. So he gathers a bunch of Japanese advisors and asks them, how should I begin my speech and so forth. And they tell him, the Japan advisors tell him to begin his speech by praising Japanese culture, how be deferential for Japanese culture, how he respects the people of Japan, and so forth. All these accolades for Japan and for Japanese culture. And he says, okay, that's good. So he goes to Japan, the day comes, he starts his speech. He starts with this praising, salutary expressions of deference for Japanese culture. And as soon as he finishes his introduction, the Japanese audience explodes into a sustained laughter. And he's very upset. He's very flustered. But he puts his act together and finishes his speech. And as soon as he finishes his speech, he calls his Japanese advisors and asks them, what happened? And they say, well, look, the Japanese audience was told that every American begins his speech with a joke. So no matter what he says at the beginning, laugh as hard as you can. So, but fortunately, we don't face that problem here. Turks and Greeks share a lot of things together. By nature and in line with my profession as a diplomat, I prefer to look forward. I look ahead to that end point where resolved disputes are left behind us for historians to study. But as we look forward, we must also keep listening to historians, because that is the background light for diplomats. When you look at history, there are documents that continue to define the spirit and the destiny of nations and shape their future. The British Magna Carta, the American Declaration of Independence, and the French Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen are such landmark, historic landmarks. Note that these are all national and unilateral declarations. Lausanne is such a milestone for Turkey, and we heard this afternoon from many speakers that it's also the case for modern Greece, but with an important difference from the documents that I mentioned. It is not a unilateral declaration, but a negotiated international contract. That's what makes Lausanne different. Lausanne first and foremost confirmed the independence and sovereignty of the Turkish nation, paving the way to the declaration of the Turkish Republic. It certifies Turkish territorial integrity. In other words, it's the title deed of modern Turkey. And we heard, and I found it very interesting, the same interpretation was made for Greece by a speaker from our friends from Greece. I was both impressed and touched by that characterization. Let me then characterize from the perspective of diplomacy the unique features of the Lausanne Treaty. When you are among the last speakers after a two-day panel, there is not much left to say, because everything that you are going to say has been said probably in better ways by other speakers. But let me say that it's a detailed, comprehensive treaty negotiated over a period of nearly seven months. Its 143 articles address intricate and sensitive issues. In fact, the conference was briefly interrupted due to disagreements over capitulations, over Mosul, and over minority rights. While many treaties signed after wars eventually find their way to the dustbins of history, Lausanne has endured and remains in force after more than a century. It would not be wrong to say that it's a living document in terms of continuing to regulate Turkey's relations with its neighbors, a remarkable feat by any standards. Indeed, I think we all owe thanks to the negotiators for producing such a viable contract, despite very divergent interests and aims, different aims prevailing at the time. All accords signed after the war were agreements imposed by the winners on the losers. Lausanne was the only exception, as it was an accord negotiated between equals. And that's, I think, made a very important difference in the texture and the durability of this treaty. It proves that the case of diplomacy works even under the most trying circumstances. And it also further proves that diplomacy is capable of building a durable peace. In short, I may be exaggerating here, but Lausanne can be easily described as a diplomatic masterpiece. Okay. Now, as we look forward, what does Lausanne tell us? What does it offer us for our intertwined future together, Greece and Turkey? First, we must recognize the fundamental fact that Lausanne Peace Treaty still constitutes the backbone of Turkish-Greek relations. I'll be finishing very soon. I know everybody's tired, but just a few more minutes. It's a reference document that continues to guide many aspects of the ties between Turkey and Greece. Lausanne also provided a mutual point of departure for succession of bilateral and regional agreements between the two countries in the 1930s. The advent of the Cyprus question did not stop the efforts of the two sides on and off stage to reduce tensions and seek areas of agreement. The Memorandum of Understanding of 1988, the Madrid Declaration of 1997, and the initiation of exploratory talks in 2002 are the notable milestones in this respect. The point I'm trying to make is that despite the long-standing differences, even so, Turkey and Greece are not strangers to reconciliation and peacemaking. Their common past and joint achievements are the functional legacy in their efforts to chart a peaceful future. As I have publicly stated before, having served in different capacities in the Turkish Foreign Ministry and as a member of Parliament, when I say I have stated that publicly, I don't, that's what I mean. In this connection, I think it is important to keep in mind, and a speaker before us pointed this in a different way, that Lausanne is not a bilateral agreement between Turkey and Greece, but a multinational treaty with other signatories. Having been directly involved in some of the bilateral contacts as a diplomat, I can confidently claim, assert, that Turkish-Greek issues can be resolved. I will repeat that. Turkish and Greek issues can be resolved. Why? Because there is a wealth of wisdom and experience accumulated over the years, beginning with the Lausanne Peace Treaty and continuing with what we call exploratory talks. It's not easy, it's not simple, it's not within sight, but rather it's complicated and prone to be influenced by internal and external factors. But a well-prepared diplomatic process can tackle the issues, daunting issues between us. I have to be crystal clear, however. The impasse is not in the intractability of the different issues. The problem lies elsewhere. To put it in another way, the problem is not one of diplomacy. It's not one of diplomacy, but for lack of a better term, the problem is one of public relations or, public relations, okay. The challenge is, and this point has been made by many speakers before me, for the Turkish and Greek peoples to moderate their expectations and the meaning of what compromise means and what a compromise, if achieved, what gains it would bring to the two countries.
Good things.
Good things. This is why we have moderator here. So I think my concluding message is this. If our ancestors could do it 100 years ago and come to an agreement under trying circumstances, much more trying circumstances than what we experience today, we can and must do the same today. Our future generations deserve better. That would be a fitting tribute to the foundation laid by Mustafa Kemal and Eleftherios Venizelos. Thank you very much for your kind attention.